Welcome to Cause Before Symptom with your host, James Carner.
Tonight we're going to be talking about the ark that Mussolini could not touch. Yeah, we got the proof. Stick around. Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Today, October 7th, 2025. Tonight's episode is all about the Ark of the Covenant. And we've got proof that the Catholics don't have it. The Vatican doesn't have it. They tried. Italy sent troops in twice and could not recover it. That's how important the Ark of the Covenant was for them, and they failed. Why? It's because we worship a good God, a God who loves us and would not give that kind of power over to the enemy. Shout out to everybody on the live chat rumble. We've got Boots Hafner, number one warrior, saying, all right. Warriors, come out and pray, yay. Hello, Pastor James of the airwaves and warrior family. Hoping everyone is feeling blessed. Let's all hit that thumbs up button to get this show up on the charts. Thank you, Boots. Yeah, Rumble does not do anything with the algorithm unless there are thumbs up. So hit the X button, hit the thumbs, and then hit live chat. You won't lose your place, I promise. And if you're new to this program, please just hit the thumbs up for us. It will help us grow. Also, number two warrior is Robert Gertison saying, hi, James. Hey, everyone, let's do this. What's going on, Robert? And number three, Scorpion, says, hey, y'all. That's a warrior right there. And number four, warrior is Jeffrey. Jeffrey says, hey, y'all. So I learned that there's a way you can regrow teeth, and it's through frequencies now. I don't know how much weight this holds. Yeah, it's an inventor in Canada, actually, who invented it. And, well, he got snuffed. Yeah, so sorry. Yeah, there was a way to do it just through frequency, and now there's not. And Jeffrey says also, can you explain why Russia opens their churches showing the murals of Jesus? Well, because they're trying to make a moral point for Europe as they're coming after them, saying, we're backed by the King of Kings. Now, is that true? I don't think that Jesus is backing Putin. But the people of Russia, whom are worshiping Jesus, and they have a pretty huge Christian population, well, Jesus is, their dude. So Jesus is going to look after his own. And so I would say that the propaganda of these Russians, they're just basically saying, look, we're more righteous than you are. We know the Bible, and it says that you can try any weapon against us, it shall not work. So I think that's why they're just flexing their Christian muscles. Will it work? Well, the Bible says Gog never goes down, ever. Now, Gog loses wars, sure, but it never goes down. It always comes back. That's the bear. That's Mother Russia. And Mother Russia does play a huge role in end times prophecy, but only as the one that goes with China, that goes after Israel in the end of days. And this is what they're trying to stage right now. They're trying to fake revelation. And is it going to work? I just don't see it right now. What Jesus said, just as in the days of Noah, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Now, there were no Nephilim when Jesus was walking the earth, so we know that. And we know there's no Nephilim now. We can't see them. They're supposed to be walking the earth, so, that's one clue. The other clue is men's hearts, all of them, except for just a few, which I believe will be the 144,000. Men's hearts will be evil continually, meaning their VMAT2 gene will be bred out. They won't believe in God. So they've got no moral standards, and they're just going to do what thou wilt, which is Aleister Crowley's law. Jeffrey says, also, Nigeria Christians are dying a lot too, nearly 7,000. Well, the Bible says Christians will be persecuted in the end of days. So consider yourself blessed right now that they haven't outlawed the Bible in America and went after the Christians. Now, if things are lining up what it looks like it's lining up, and I'm hoping it doesn't, it really seems that America is falling in the lines of Germany. And if that is the case, then concentration camps won't be for Christians. It will be for the LGBTQ community. That's what it looks like. And they'll start rounding that up just like Germany did when they went after the people who, wow, did you see that little light that just went straight like this way? It went like this way. It wasn't dust. I don't think so. But that's what Germany did. They tried to, what Hitler basically said, look, we're not being blessed at all because we have this, perversion going on, and they went after that. So I don't think they're going to go after the Christians. Christians aren't what Trump sees as the problem because that's his voter base. But they're going to use some minority, and unfortunately, the CIA has been using this minority to pitch them up as the bad man, as the bad guy, and yeah, they're being used, and I don't know how else to say it other than I feel bad for the LGBTQ community, which happens to have a point that they're just human beings. They have rights just like we do. And so I think that's important to honor those rights. But I think what also is important is that they recognize that they are going to be used by the government against the people to divide and conquer us. And so this is how it's always been. They're a huge movement. They have a huge budget. They make lots of money for their cause. And I really think that it's all because they're being played. So, and I know it hurts. I know it doesn't make us happy, but Jesus said to love your neighbor, love God first. You got to love him first before you can figure out how to love yourself, and then love your neighbor. Well, your neighbor is LGBTQ people, loving them is, letting them be accepted in our world. Okay. Yeah, they have a different sexual preference than you do, but that doesn't make them a wicked, evil person, okay? You have to understand the context of the Bible, and it's when a group of people start to use things like lust and perversion to harm other people. That's when we get in trouble. Well, not we, because I'm not interested in doing it, but that's your Sodom and Gomorrah, where they were so out of tune of just human dignity. They would rape every new person that came into town, whether they were children or adults, period. That was their custom, to have a huge orgy for every visitor. That's not us. Thank God. Can you imagine crossing the border? Maybe we should. Maybe that'll stop the immigration. Come on in. Our custom here as Sodom is we're going to sodomize you and everyone that you bring. But no, that wouldn't be good. Anyway, we got a long show tonight, so let's get into a quick short commercial. Then when we get back, we are going to talk about how the Ark of the Covenant has never really moved. We can prove it.
Do you own a business? Would you like to pay next to nothing in taxes? Nelson Rockefeller quoted, "The secret to success is to own nothing but control everything." Basically, when you own something in your name, you also own the liabilities. Introducing the solution. Begin an unincorporated association and remove assets out of your name while remaining in control and management of them. An unincorporated association is a state-registered entity that you can put assets into, is member-based and not tied to your name, has a tax-exempt EIN number, and is private and not found when doing online search. Whether you receive a 1099 or K-1 under your name, consider setting up your own unincorporated association and allow the association to be the owner of your assets and free yourself from the burden of personal tax liability. Our clients are saving tens of thousands of dollars on taxes every year for the rest of their lives. Book a call with us and find out how we can do the same for you.
All right, we're back to the show. Got a long one. Better get right into it. To answer Jeffrey's question, Jeffrey says, so that's why ISIS in the USA, they practice the Christian hunt. No, I don't think they're going after the Christians. There's too many of us. Too many Christians with guns. That ain't going to work. Okay, they don't have enough personnel to round us up in trains and put us into a place. No, I do believe they're going to go after the LGBTQ community, and the reason being is because they announced it in a movie. Go watch V for Vendetta, okay? The whole operation that they did in that country was to try to genetically remove being gay, and, well, what happened was a revolution. And so, no, I don't think they're going after the Christians. They need the Christians right now for the Third World War to gang up with, well, to team up with Judaism and go after the Muslims. That is what Albert Pike predicted, and that is the plan, and I'm going with it. And the reason being is because he wasn't wrong on the First and Second World War, and he predicted it all before then. So that's what we got to work with, folks, so get used to it. All right, the ark that Mussolini could not touch. This is the show tonight. So there are relics in this world that do not yield to time, to an empire, or any ambition whatsoever. They're not guarded by walls or armies, but by a covenant. And among them, none is more feared by those who know its power than the Ark of the Covenant, the throne of God's presence between the cherubim. Now, over 2,000 years, kings, conquerors, and occultists have sought it and tried to find it. Pharaohs, popes, and tyrants have dreamed of unveiling it. Yet the ark has only ever bowed to the will of its creator. And that will has placed it in the most unexpected of kingdoms, Ethiopia. When Benito Mussolini set his sights on Africa in 1935, he was not merely seeking conquest. He was reaching for something ancient, something divine. He called it the rebirth of the Roman Empire, a crusade to restore Rome's glory, with the Ark of the Covenant, of course. But beneath the speeches and banners, beneath the black shirts and the fascist salutes, there was an older hunger stirring in the ranks. A belief whispered among his officers and Vatican allies that Ethiopia held the lost Ark of the Covenant, and that whoever possessed it would command heaven's favor and rule the nations. But God does not share his throne. The Italian legions crossed the Red Sea like a counterfeit exodus, wielding poison gas instead of prayer. They burned churches and monasteries, believing the ark could be seized as spoils. Yet when their columns reached Axum, the city called Zion of Africa, they found nothing but silence. The guardian monks stood unarmed. I'm not joking. And their eyes were unflinching. The ark had vanished. And according to the priests, it had risen from its sanctuary and had been carried by angels across the land to a hidden monastery on the waters of Lake Tana. Others said it sank below the ground, swallowed by the mountain itself until the invaders were gone. Now, Mussolini sent word to Rome that the emperors of Ethiopia is defeated, but he was wrong. Haile Selassie, last heir of Solomon of Sheba, fled into exile, but carried the promise of Psalm 68. Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God. 5 years later, as the Allies drove out the Axis, that promise was fulfilled. The ark returned to Axum. Selassie returned to his throne, and the empire that had defied heaven crumbled into dust. Now, historians will tell you Mussolini lost because of bad strategy or British intervention. But those who walk by faith see another story, a warning written in divine ink. The same hand that wrote the law on stone wrote this in history. No man, no pope, no tyrant may touch what God has consecrated. Now, Rome's legions could not, the Nazis could not, and the Antichrist, who will soon come, will not. The ark remains where it has always been, guarded by one silent monk who will never leave its side. He does not eat meat, he never marries, and he spends his days in prayer. The ark is his life, his breath, his reason for being. And as long as he breathes, no empire will lay a finger on it. The world scoffs at such a devotion, just like Mussolini mocked Ethiopia before his downfall. Yet the record is very clear. The empire that sought to grasp the things of God fell by its own hand, while the humble who kept faith still endured. The Ark of the Covenant is not lost, it's just hidden, waiting for the day when the true king, not a dictator, shall open its veil once more. And that is the story the empires fear, not because of gold or power or archaeology, but because the ark bears witness that God still reigns. Remember, Jesus is the king of earth. Satan is the prince, and he was let loose just a short time. Prince of the kingdom of hell, but he's not the king of earth. And it is one throne that cannot be overthrown, and that's Jesus. And that is why Mussolini's army marched into Ethiopia with pride and left in complete shame. They found nothing, because what they sought was never theirs to touch. Now, long before Mussolini's legions marched into Ethiopia, before Rome or even Babylon rose to power, there was a covenant sealed in fire and cloud. In the wilderness of Sinai, Moses stood before the trembling people of Israel, and God commanded the buildings of a chest of acacia wood, overlaid with gold, and upon which two cherubim faced one another. Now between them would rest the invisible presence of the Almighty, a throne not made by human hands, but sanctified by divine fire. That chest was the Ark of the Covenant, and it became the single most powerful symbol of God's dwelling among men. The ark led Israel through the wilderness, parted rivers, and struck down the enemies of God. It was the physical representation of his promise to abide with his chosen people at that time. But Scripture grows silent on the ark's fate after the days of Solomon. The prophet Jeremiah speaks of a time when men shall no more say, "The ark of the covenant of the Lord," neither shall it come to mind. Somewhere between Solomon's temple and the Babylonian exile, it disappears. No longer mentioned, no longer seen. Now, to the Western world, it becomes a mystery, but in the highlands of Ethiopia, the story continued. According to the ancient Kebra Nagast, the Book of Glory of Kings, the ark was not lost, it was taken. The text, preserved in Ge'ez and guarded by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, tells how Solomon's son by the Queen of Sheba, Menelik I, journeyed to Jerusalem as a young man. He was received with joy, blessed by his father, and offered a place at court. But Menelik chose to return to his mother's kingdom, to rule over Ethiopia. Unknown to Solomon, the high priest's son, Azariah, conspired with other firstborn sons of Israel's nobles. They removed the true ark from the temple and replaced it with a copy. When Menelik's caravan departed, they carried the ark across the Red Sea, fleeing with divine fire, hidden in an ox cart. Now, the Kebra Nagast describes how Solomon awoke from a dream and realized what had happened. He saw the sun of Israel rising over Ethiopia and cried out that the glory of God had departed from his people. When his soldiers pursued Menelik, they could not overtake him, for the ark itself had flown a cubit above the earth and crossed the waters by divine command. From that day forward, Ethiopia became the new Zion, the land where God had chosen to rest his presence. Now keep in mind, the ark didn't belong in Israel at that time. Solomon turned the temple into a den of thieves, into a money changer's paradise, into an idol worship mixed with many religions. And the priests of Axum still echo this truth. The ark did not flee. She went where the Lord desired to dwell. And the Ethiopians at that time were following not Talmud, but the actual hold on, I'm having a brain fart. They were following the actual Torah, the original 5 books of the Bible. Now, the ark, they say, was not stolen by man, but escorted by angels to a land uncorrupted by idolatry. And there it was placed in the care of the Solomonic line, the bloodline that would reign unbroken for nearly 3 millennia, culminating in Emperor Haile Selassie I, the 225th descendant of Solomon and Sheba. Now, for Western theologians, the claim defied logic. For Ethiopians, it was history. The ark was not a legend, but a living covenant, enshrined in every church of their nation. Each Orthodox temple bears a tablet, a small replica of the ark, carried in possession during the feast of Timkat, symbolizing that every altar on Ethiopian soil is a reflection of the one true ark resting in Axum. Now, I bring this up in this show on purpose. This is because I wanted to know if the Vatican truly could or had taken the ark, if the Nazis got it, if Indiana Jones got it. I wanted to know if there was any documentation, and I spent 2 to 3 days just finding books and going through books and trying to find out if anybody came close. And what we found was none of them did. Okay, and so this is the history of that. Now, when modern archaeologists doubted, Ethiopian monks stood firm. Remember, modern archaeologists, modern scientists, modern theologians. Okay, they're just that. They're modern, but they don't hold on to the real truth because they've been given the lie. If you research history, history is always won by the victors, and the spoils comes tainted information. So we don't have the real truth, and this is why I am literally trying to expose that the Ark of the Covenant moved from Jerusalem to Ethiopia. Everking says, idol worship like Christians? Well, not all Christians are perfect, believe me. And I'm not talking about just your non-denominational Christians. The Catholic Church are crazy at idol worship. No doubt about it. All right, moving on. So their belief was not inherited from colonial faith, but from the continuity of worship stretching back to the days of King Solomon. Now, as Dr. Bernard Leeman's research has shown, inscriptions in the Sabian language carved into the stones of ancient temples near Wukro and Yeha speak of kings and queens of Sheba ruling a mixed population of Israelites and Cushites. Evidence that the Israelite faith had indeed taken root in Ethiopia centuries before Jesus Christ. This is the beginning of the Ark's second covenant, a covenant not with one tribe, but with a people who carried God's law across the deserts and mountains to the ends of the earth. You see, the Ark did not vanish, it just migrated. It withdrew from the corrupt courts of Israel to dwell among those who would not bow to idols or empires. And in the heart of Ethiopia, guarded by priests who do not sleep, the presence of the Almighty found refuge. The legacy would one day draw the eyes of another empire, an empire that believed it could conquer even God himself. Now, for nearly 3,000 years, Ethiopia carried within its heart a covenant forgotten by the rest of the world. Its heart, a covenant forgotten by the rest of the world. And while its kingdoms rose and fell, while Rome adopted the cross for conquest and Europe buried faith beneath power, Ethiopia remained a living echo of the ancient world, a land where the priesthood still guarded what Solomon built and Moses beheld. The Solomonic dynasty, tracing its bloodline to the union of Solomon and Sheba, ruled not as mere monarchs, but as custodians of divine inheritance. Excuse me. Their authority came not from crown or sword, but from the ark itself, which symbolized the unbroken relationship between God and his anointed. in Axum, the sacred capital of the empire, the Ark of the Covenant rested in the church of Our Lady Mary of Zion. It was not displayed to the public nor carried into battle, but kept in a small, windowless chamber guarded by a single monk, and he alone could gaze upon it. Once appointed, he would never again leave the church grounds. He lived, prayed, and died within those walls. His life became a living offering, a continual watch over the dwelling place of the Almighty. And no treasure on earth could match such devotion, and no empire could compel these priests to betray it. Now, the ark was not merely an artifact. It was the heart of Ethiopia's identity. The people believed their nation was the new Israel, and their kings were the sons of David. And this belief shaped every part of their culture, from coronation rites to church rituals. In a way, he was, because Menelik the First was Solomon's son. The emperor's crown was not only a symbol of power, it was a spiritual mantle, linking him directly to the throne of Solomon. Even the Christianization of Ethiopia under King Ezana in the 4th century did not erase its Hebrew roots. Instead, it completed them. The ark became the bridge between the Old Covenant and the New, between the law of Moses and the gospel of Jesus Christ. Makakyaza says, "Thank you so much for praying for me in August. I had a robotic lung biopsy, and it was not lung cancer. My son Zach asked for prayer, and you prayed for me that very night. Forever grateful." Well, my pleasure, Makakyaza. Love you. God bless you. I really remember that prayer, and I knew everything was going to be fine. And yeah, let the doctors look for all of their crap. They're not going to find anything, because you are a highly favored, mighty, wealthy, blessed woman of the Most High. So I believe you were the Zach's mother who was going into. Please help me remember that one. I think, yeah, Zach's mom. Or maybe Zach's dad. I can't remember, but I'm almost. But regardless, male or female, you are blessed, highly blessed. And disease is a state of mind, okay? It's a state of mind. We have the power, all of us have the power to have the faith to tell cancer to go bye-bye. Or we have the power to tell cancer to go bye-bye out of other people. I believe that, and the Bible backs that up 100%. Even Jesus said, "Greater works that we will do on earth than even he did." I want to start seeing some of that. Now back to Ethiopia and the Ark of the Covenant. The priests and scholars of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church taught that the Ark represented the body of Mary. Makakyaita says, yes, my name is Kay. It was Kay, that's right. Okay, Kay, God bless you, my dear, and thank you for listening to my show. Appreciate that. So the Tewahedo Church taught that the ark represented the body of Mary, who carried the divine word within her as the ark once carried the tablets of the law. No, the Ethiopian Tewahedo Church does not worship Mary or any idols, period. They follow the law and follow Jesus' teachings. Thus, the ark became not only the throne of God, but also the shadow of the incarnation. And every liturgy, every hymn, every possession was an act of remembrance, a continual retelling of God's dwelling among men. And this deep continuity made Ethiopia an enigma to the Western world. When explorers and missionaries arrived, they found a faith far older than their own, a Christianity that was untouched by Rome, uncontaminated by Reformation, and rooted in a language and liturgy that predated Latin itself. Ethiopia did not receive the gospel through colonial conquest, but through its own prophecy. Isaiah had foretold it. Princes shall come out of Egypt. Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God. I'm telling you guys, I am on the Ethiopian road. I'm fully convinced now. And so I have been trying to take the Ethiopian canon, okay, the Tewahedo Ge'ez version, and translate it to English. And I have ran into so many problems as the AI that I use, it just continues to update. And when it updates, I lose all of my work, and then I have to feed all of my work into it. And it's like every time I make progress, they shut me down, so I can't. So it's a very long process of doing it verse by verse. I have to do it verse by verse, cut and paste. And then I have to continually ask the AI, are you translating from Ge'ez, the original Tewahedo Church Orthodox translation, to English? And I have to keep repeating it. So I'm on board with Ethiopia. They have done good in the eyes of God. Now, by the time Mussolini dreamed of his new empire, Ethiopia had already outlasted every empire of man. It had survived Islamic invasions, Jesuit infiltration, and centuries of isolation. Its emperors bore the title Kebra Nagast, or King of Kings. Yes. The same title later claimed by Jesus Christ in Revelation. And the ark, unseen yet ever present, was their divine seal. To the Ethiopians, it was proof that God's covenant had not abandoned them. To the outside world, it was just a myth that could not be erased by archaeology or any reason. And this was the empire Mussolini sought to conquer, not to barren land or for a forgotten people, but the last remnant of the ancient world that still remembered God's throne. They wanted to take the ark and wipe out the history, especially the Ge'ez version of the Old and New Testaments. Ethiopia stood as living testimony that heaven had once touched earth and that divine authority could not be transferred by conquest. And Haile Selassie, the final heir of the Solomonic line, embodied this continuity. Crowned in 1930 beneath the inscription, the conquering lion of the tribe of Judah, he believed his reign was not political, but prophetic. His coronation was a covenant renewal attended by bishops, priests, and representatives from all across the world. Yet what they witnessed was more than a ceremony. It was a declaration that the line of David still lived, and that the ark of God still had its resting place. But far from north, another man who watched those ceremonies with envy, Mussolini, calling himself the second Deuce, now I know where we get that name from, dreamed of restoring the glory of Rome. I'll be right back. Gotta take a deuce. He saw in Ethiopia not merely a colony, but a rival kingdom. A people who claim to divine kingship mocked his secular empire. Bad mistake. And so, with steel and poison, he set his sights upon the land that remembered what Rome had forgotten. Now, Mussolini did not yet understand that the ark he sought was not guarded by armies, but by heaven itself. And by the dawn of the 30s, Benito Mussolini saw himself not merely as a man, but as a messiah of empire. He dreamed of resurrecting the ancient Roman world, a world of Caesars, eagles, and divine conquest. Standing upon the balcony of the Palazzo Venezia, he would lift his chin to the crowd and declare, "Rome is not dead, she lives in me." But what Mussolini sought was more than territorial expansion. His war was metaphysical. He wanted to rewrite destiny, and the one place on earth that defied his vision was Ethiopia, the last kingdom that still claimed a covenant older than Rome itself. Now, to Mussolini, the conquest of Ethiopia was a crusade of pride, disguised as progress. He believed Italy, where the Vatican is, was chosen by Providence to bring civilization to Africa. In truth, it was vengeance disguised as virtue. The humiliation of Adwa in 1896, when Ethiopian forces under Emperor Menelik II crushed the first Italian invasion, had haunted the Italian psyche for 40 years. Mussolini promised to erase that shame. He would not only defeat Ethiopia, he would subdue her faith. He would take the land of Sheba and Solomon and place it beneath the Roman cross. Well, the Vatican was not innocent in this ambition either. Pope Pius XI saw Mussolini as the defender of Christendom's temporal throne. In the 1929 Lateran Treaty, the church and the fascist state reconciled Rome's altar, and Rome's sword joined again. Catholic clergy blessed the invading troops, sprinkling holy water on the very bombs that would rain down upon the highlands. Priests preached that this war was the will of God. Sure. The fulfillment of prophecy to baptize Ethiopia into modernity. But beneath the pious rhetoric lurked a darker obsession, whispered among fascist officers and Vatican archivists. Ethiopia held the Ark of the Covenant, and we want it. So, this was no rumor invented by soldiers. European explorers and scholars, including the Jesuits who had infiltrated Ethiopia centuries before, had long reported that Axum was home to the Kebra Nagast, the Ark of the King of Kings, within the Church of the Mary of Zion. They said the sacred chest of Moses still rested, guarded by a lineage of priests who would die before revealing it. To the Vatican's mystical wing, the same current that later birthed Nazi occultism, the Ark represented something more than religious symbolism. It was a vessel of divine authority, a physical bridge between heaven and earth. Possession of the Ark, they believed, could re-sanctify Rome's empire and restore divine legitimacy to the papal throne. Mussolini fed on such myths. He styled himself as a modern Caesar, I like that, Caesar instead of Caesar. He styled himself as a modern Caesar, ordained by heaven, declaring Italy the sword of Christ. Right. His generals were briefed not only in strategy, but in symbolism. Did Jesus ask us to follow symbolism? No. The invasion maps bore not just borders, but relic sites. Axum, Lalibela, Gondar, Lake Tana, places where prophecy and power were said to converge. They did not march merely for empire, they marched for the relic of God. In October of 1935, Italian forces crossed into Ethiopia from Eritrea and Somaliland. Columns of tanks, trucks, and planes advanced across deserts and mountains that had never bowed to any foreign flag. Their soldiers sang hymns to Rome and carried crucifixes beside machine guns. It was a grotesque parody of crusade, and the Ethiopians, armed with little more than rifles and prayer, met them with faith. God and St. Mary are with us, they cried, waving their banners inscribed with the Lion of Judah. Mussolini's campaign was swift but brutal. Entire villages were burned. Monasteries, some older than the Vatican itself, were shelled. Priests were shot for refusing to hand over sacred scrolls. Chemical weapons rained from the sky. Mustard gas fell on shepherds and saints alike. Yet even the Italians desecrated the soil. The Ark remained hidden. Soldiers sent to Axum under orders to seize the relic found the church locked and the priests unflinching. To those who tried to force their way in there, struck by sudden illness or panic, retreating in terror. Reports circulated of a blinding light within the chapel at night, of strange voices carried on in the wind. Mussolini dismissed these as superstition, but in his inner circle, certain generals began to whisper that the Ark itself resisted them, that some unseen power shielded Ethiopia from full submission. Vatican observers noted that every unit sent toward Axum suffered unexpected losses. Aircraft crashed in clear skies. Entire platoons vanished in the highlands, swallowed by fog and confusion. Still, Mussolini pressed on. In May 5th, 1936, his troops entered Addis Ababa. The Deuce proclaimed to the world, Italy has her empire. Fascist civilization has triumphed. But even at victory, the ark eluded him. He had captured soil and stone, but not the spirit of the nation. Haile Selassie had fled to Jerusalem and then to London. Yet his throne still held the covenant. And the relic that Mussolini sought, the symbol that would crown his new Rome, remained where it had always been, untouched and unseen. What Mussolini never understood was that his war was not against men, but against God's memory. The empire he tried to build was nothing more than a shadow cast against eternity. He could conquer land, but he could not conquer the covenant. For the ark was never an object of power. It was a witness, and it would not bear false kings. When Mussolini's invasion began in earnest, the world was watching, but heaven was already stirring. The fascist columns moved like locusts across the Horn of Africa, trucks, tanks, and poison gas in the hands of men who thought themselves gods. And they came out not only to conquer, but to humiliate a nation that had never bowed. In their hearts, they carried the pride of Babel. In their orders, they carried Rome's final reach for the sacred. Ethiopia, in their eyes, was not simply an empire. It was a vault of relics, a living museum of pre-Vatican Christianity. Somewhere in its mountains, they believed, lay the ark that would restore divine legitimacy to Caesar's heirs. The first assaults fell upon the northern strongholds, where the mountains of Tigray cradle the ancient churches of Axum. It was here, on the high plateau called the Roof of Africa, that faith itself became a weapon. While Italian planes screamed overhead, the priests of Axum fasted and prayed. They anointed the doors of the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion with holy oil and sealed them with ancient words that no foreigner would ever translate. When the fascist troops approached, their officers expected resistance of arms. What they found was silence. Monks stood barefoot before the church, holding wooden crosses, chanting psalms and ge'ez as bombs fell in the distance. But what the soldiers did not see was what had already taken place. Days before the invasion reached Axum, the Ark of the Covenant had been moved. Now, oral tradition says the guardian monk, forewarned in a vision, led a secret procession by night. The relic was wrapped in layers of silk and linen, carried beneath a canopy on the shoulders of chosen priests. They moved in complete silence, singing only the words of Psalms 132, which says, "Arise, O Lord, into thy rest, thou and the ark of thy strength." Now, no one outside the priesthood knew their route, only that they followed the ancient pilgrim paths southward toward Lake Tana, or Tana. At dawn, when Italian scouts entered the city, they found that the church was intact, but it was empty. The ark was gone, and what remained was the stillness of a holy absence, a silence so deep that even the invaders hesitated to enter. In his unknown empire, Dean Arnold records that fascist intelligence units scoured the surrounding monasteries, interrogated priests, and sent reconnaissance to Lake Tana's islands. Rumors reached them of a hidden sanctuary called Tana Kirkos, where the ark had once rested for centuries before being moved to Axum. Some claimed that the monks there had seen light upon the waters and a voice telling them the covenant is moving again. When Mussolini's officers arrived at Lake Tana, they found dozens of monasteries isolated upon the islands, each guarded by priests who refused even to speak to them. The Italians searched cellars, crypts, and even caves, finding nothing but old scrolls and stone crosses. According to local accounts preserved by Bernard Leeman's students, the invaders even attempted to desecrate some tablets, which are miniature replicas of the ark kept in every Ethiopian church. But the soldiers who did so fell ill, some losing their sight others their reason. Word of these events spread through the ranks, and by the end of 1936, many troops refused to approach Axum or Lake Tana at all, calling it a Montagna di Dio, the mountain of God. Still, the war pressed on. Mussolini declared Ethiopia annexed, his empire reborn, but his victory was hollow. The ark he had coveted slipped beyond reach, as though it had simply stepped out of time. Haile Selassie, exiled in Jerusalem, continued to send messages to the monks, urging them to guard what had been entrusted to their fathers. In exile, he prayed, "If we must wander, let the ark never wander from thee." Now the priests obeyed. During the long occupation, the ark remained hidden. Some say it stayed upon Tana Kirkos. Others say it was carried farther into the Simeon Mountains, beneath caves so old their walls still bear the soot of Israeli fires. Wherever it went, it eluded the empire of Mussolini. Now, what fascinates historians is how completely the Italians failed to document anything resembling its discovery. Mussolini's propagandists had prepared elaborate plans for the triumphal unveiling of the Ark in Rome. Sketches of victory, arches, and museum halls survive in fascist archives, meant to display the relic beside the papal treasures of St. Peter's. Yet the pages remain blank where the Ark's description should be. The empire that claimed to have conquered the land could not conquer its mystery. This is true. This is written. It's on record. Now, the invasion of the Holy Mountain was more than a military act. It was the collision of two theologies. One worshiped the state, the other the living God. The first came with weapons that burned the flesh. The second stood armed only with faith and fasting. The invaders found no ark because they were not worthy to see it. What they tried to take by force was protected by covenant, invisible to the unclean. And so when the smoke cleared and the empire of Mussolini declared its triumph, the real victory belonged to the unseen. The Ark of the Covenant, unchained, unbroken, unclaimed, remained God's alone. Now, at Mussolini's war machine ground deeper into the highlands, it became clear that the real power in Ethiopia did not reside in its crumbling cities or its scattered soldiers, but in its invisible sanctuaries. To the fascist eye, the land was primitive, a place to be civilized by Rome's iron hand, yet beneath that soil lay one of the most sophisticated spiritual networks on earth, older than the Vatican and older than Islam, stretching from the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela to the silent monasteries of Lake Tana. To outsiders, these were ruins. To Ethiopians, they were living arteries of covenant, pathways that once carried the ark from Jerusalem to its resting place in Axum, and which now, in the hour of invasion, carried it again to safety. In Dean Arnold's book, Unknown Empire, he records the testimony of priests who spoke, only in whispers, of that secret movement. Before the Italians entered Tigray, word spread through the monasteries that the Mother of Zion must walk again. Under moonlight, monks wrapped the ark in veils of white cloth and placed it upon a litter carried by 12 men chosen for their purity. They walked barefoot, heads bowed, through valleys where no roads existed, chanting the ancient Ge'ez hymn of ascent. The night that they left Axum, the air was said to tremble. When the animals fell silent, their path followed the line of Menelik's original journey, the same trail traced in the Kebra Nagast, the hidden trail of Zion. Now, for centuries, this route had been preserved not in maps, but in memory, guarded by families who lived along its course. Every village along the way possessed its own tablet, a consecrated replica of the ark. When the priests carrying the true ark passed, the villagers knelt and laid their tablets on the ground, forming a living corridor of reverence. The people called it the passing of the Shekinah or Shekinah. I think Shekinah. Some claimed a radiant cloud moved above the procession, illuminating their path when all torches were extinguished. Now, Italian patrols heard rumors of these movements, but could never trace them. Bernard Leeman's research, supported by inscriptions at Ajkawa and Yeha, suggested that the Ark's journey southward mirrored the trade routes once used by Sabian and Israelite settlers nearly 1,000 years before Christ. Each station on that route, Yeha, Wukro, Debris Damo, Gorgora, and finally Tanakirkos, held a temple or cave linked to the Sheba Menelik cycle. Now, to the invaders, these were meaningless relics. To the priests, they were coordinates of protection, each a node in a sacred geometry that had shielded the Ark for a millennia. Now, when Italian intelligences received reports of a hidden island on Lake Tana guarded by monks who refused contact with outsiders, a detachment was sent to investigate, but their boats never returned. Local fishermen later told stories of storm winds rising from a clear sky, capsizing the expedition before it reached the shore. Whether divine intervention or nature's hand, the effect was the same. The Ark remained beyond reach. Even among the Italian troops, superstition took root. Pilots claimed their instruments malfunctioned when flying over Axum. Soldiers spoke of voices chanting in languages they could not understand, carried on the desert wind. In the capital, fascist officers joked nervously that the Jews of Solomon had angels for spies. The Vatican's envoys who accompanied the campaign sent coded letters back to Rome, warning that the relic resists discovery, that the Ethiopian clergy possesses mysteries best left untouched. Now, for the Ethiopians, this hidden trail was not escape. It was prophecy fulfilled. Just as God had once led Israel by a pillar of cloud, he now led his ark through the mountains of Zion and their new home. The priests saw in Mussolini's invasion a mirror of Pharaoh's pursuit, and they believed the outcome would be the same. No empire could hold what was never meant to be found. In time, the trail vanished again into legend, and the monks returned to their monasteries, and the ark disappeared from sight, as though the earth itself had swallowed it up. But among the elders, one truth endured. The covenant had survived the fire. The ark had moved as it always had, on its own terms, through faith and not by force. By the time Mussolini stood before the world declaring victory, his empire was already haunted by what it could not see. The hidden trail remained invisible to maps, to armies, and to history books, but not to heaven. It was the same path walked by angels, by Menelik, and by the guardians who refused to betray their charge. And somewhere along that ancient line, veiled in mist and song, the Ark of the Covenant waited, untouched, while the Empire of Rome boasted in its own defeat. Now, while the Ark lay hidden in the mountains, the enemy of heaven began constructing a counterfeit throne. In Rome, Mussolini presented himself not simply as conqueror, but as savior of civilization. He stood upon the balcony of Palazzo Venezia and declared before his roaring crowds that I have returned the cross to Africa. His voice echoed through the city like prophecy defiled. He paraded priests beside generals, bishops beside soldiers, and made the Vatican a partner in his campaign. Pope Pius XI, bound by political concordat, blessed the Italian army that had burned monasteries and gassed villages. To the fascists, the conquest of Ethiopia was a holy act, a crusade to reestablish Rome as the earthly seat of God. But to heaven, this was blasphemy. And believe me, they went in there, there was no spoils. They went in, they bombed everything, and then they left. They didn't even take the land as theirs. They did not. They just said, we brought Christianity back to Ethiopia. You see, they were defeated. They didn't conquer. They didn't get anything. It was a waste of money and resources. All to give Rome an idea of, hey, we're more powerful now because we have Christ on our side. No. The idea of a new Rome was not just political, it was a cult. Mussolini and his inner circle believed themselves to be resurrected the imperial religion of the Caesars, an empire divinely chosen to rule the world. Now, Rome had once worshipped as emperors as gods, and Mussolini revived that creed under a Christian mask. In fascist propaganda, he was the man of destiny, chosen to restore the glory of empire. Statues depicted him with rays of light behind his head, as if he were the sun itself. His architects built monuments that mirrored ancient temples. His generals compared him to Augustus. His orders called him the Lion of the West. Yet there was another lion who already reigned, the Lion of Judah. And Mussolini's counterfeit light could never outshine the covenant that blazed in Ethiopia. The Vatican's silence made the deception complete. In 1936, after Italy's occupation of Addis Ababa, Mussolini sent emissaries to Pope Pius XI, bearing what he called the trophies of a Christian victory. These were relics looted from Ethiopia's churches, like crosses and manuscripts and some sacred vessels, stained by the blood of monks who had refused to surrender. Among them, he had claimed, were fragments of Solomonic artifacts, as if pieces of the ark had fallen into Romans' hands. But in truth, the priests had given them false treasures. They were decoys to protect the real. But Mussolini believed he was restoring the lost glory of Israel to the papal throne. For him, the conquest of Ethiopia was the completion of Rome's unfinished covenant, the return of Zion to the West. But they didn't get jack shit because the Ethiopians were broke. They didn't have any money. They didn't have expensive paintings. No, they just grabbed all the stuff that they were using. Pots, pans, some cups. Look what we got from Ethiopia. It was deception born of pride, the same sin that led Lucifer to say, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. Well, in Mussolini's delusion, Rome would once again become the world's holy city. He envisioned a global empire ruled by his hand and sanctified by the church, a union of political power and divine authority. He ordained his architects to design a temple of peace to house the ark when it was found. We're going to find it, though. We got Ethiopia now. We're going to find it. But they never conquered it. They just went in, they destroyed it, and left with their cups and pots. According to records later uncovered, blueprints existed for a domed chamber modeled after the Pantheon, intended to enshrine the relic and present Mussolini as the high priest of a reborn empire. The ark would serve as his altar, and fascism would become a new faith. But the true Zion cannot be built by human hands. What Mussolini failed to understand was that God's dwelling is not confined to stone, gold, or empire. It rests upon obedience. Rome sought to enthrone man where God alone may sit. But heaven had already moved his throne to Ethiopia long before Caesar was born. The Kebra Nagast declares, God hath chosen Zion, but he hath also chosen Ethiopia, that his glory may dwell therein. By trying to reclaim what God had given away, Mussolini repeated the oldest rebellion in history. And in his ambition, he became the pattern of the coming Antichrist, a ruler who will one day unite the world under a false peace and proclaim himself divine. Mussolini's alliance with Hitler sealed that prophecy. Together they sought artifacts of divine power, like the Spear of Destiny, the Grail, and the Ark of the Covenant. They believed possession of these relics would grant them victory and legitimize their rule. Yet every step that they took toward Zion ended in ruin. Hitler fell in his bunker. Mussolini was hanged by his own people. And the ark they lusted after never emerged. The false Zion crumbled. Rome's empire of marble and blood fell silent once again. But in Ethiopia, the monks continued to pray. They did not need armies, treaties, or cathedrals. Their Zion was living, not built, enshrined in obedience, protected by holiness, sealed by the breath of God. The ark remained veiled not by secrecy, but by sanctity. It was the unanswerable reminder that divine presence cannot be stolen, only invited. And Mussolini's false Zion was the world's warning. Every empire that tries to counter the kingdom of God will share his fate. You cannot enthrone man in a place of the Almighty. You cannot build heaven through conquest. You cannot touch the ark without perishing, for its fire burns through pride. The fascist dream of a new Rome died in the same way as every rebellion against God had died, by the weight of its own arrogance. Now, Ethiopia still stands prior in the eyes of the world, but rich in covenant. Rome sought to steal its ark and lost its soul. Mussolini tried to rebuild Zion and built only a tomb. Upon that tomb, the same truth was written that once burned on Sinai. I am the Lord thy God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. That was on Mussolini's tomb. When Addis Ababa fell in May of 1936, the world thought Ethiopia had been conquered. Italian flags flew above the palaces of the Solomonic line, and fascist parades filled the capital with the hollow triumph of empire. Mussolini proclaimed before his people that the ancient kingdom of Sheba and Solomon had been restored to Rome, but even as he thundered in the balcony speeches, the true heir of that kingdom, Emperor Haile Selassie I, was already on his way to exile, his body leaving Ethiopia, but his covenant remaining behind. Haile Selassie's departure was not flight. It was pilgrimage. With his family, priests, and a handful of loyal guards, he rode by mule and train to Djibouti and from there to Jerusalem, the very city where his ancestor Solomon once ruled. As he approached the Holy Land, he refused to set foot on the mount where the ark had once stood, saying, "The dwelling of God has moved from here to my country, and I am not worthy to tread where he once departed." From Jerusalem, he journeyed to Britain, where he exiled Emperor of Zion, took shelter not in a palace, but in a modest home in Bath. Yet from that quiet refuge, his voice thundered across the world. Remember, Britain was at war with Mussolini at that time. They didn't understand that Britain was the one that was controlling Mussolini and Hitler. Before the League of Nations, Haile Selassie delivered one of the most haunting addresses in modern history. The League of Nations was the United Nations prior they changed their name. He stood alone before a hall of indifferent diplomats, the only African monarch to speak in that chamber, and he declared, "God and history will remember your judgment. It is us today. It will be you tomorrow." Those words are more than protest. They were prophecy. Written a few years, the same nations that refused to defend Ethiopia would themselves be consumed by the flames of the World War II. What had been done to Addis Ababa would be done to London, Warsaw, and Rome. The emperor's warning was a divine echo of the ancient truth. When the covenant people are trampled, the curse falls upon the trampler. Even in exile, Haile Selassie carried himself not as a defeated ruler, but as a priest king of the order of David. Each day he rose before dawn to pray toward Axum. He observed the fasts of the Orthodox calendar and sent letters to the monasteries that still guarded the ark, encouraging them to stand firm. His words to Abuna, the patriarch of Ethiopia, were simple: protect the covenant. The empire is dust without it. The monk replied only once: it is safe. In those years of exile, the emperor became a living symbol of Ethiopia's endurance. While Mussolini's armies desecrated holy ground, Haile Selassie turned his suffering into intercession. British officials who met him described his manner as otherworldly. He spoke often of the ark, referring to it as not an object but a person. He would say, "It's a she," the dwelling of the word. When questioned by journalists about whether the ark truly existed, he replied, "If it were not Ethiopia, would not be. If it were not, Ethiopia would not be." Sorry, I have to blow my nose. Meanwhile, in occupied Ethiopia, the resistance moved through the highlands like a shadow army. Ragged peasants, monks, and former soldiers took up arms under the banner of the Lion of Judah. Their code was simple: God, Emperor, Ethiopia. Many claimed to have seen signs in the sky, pillars of light above Axum, stars that moved against their course, voices chanting through the night to the faithful. These were assurances that the ark had not departed. The Italian occupiers, though ruthless, could not stamp out the spirit of the nation. They built roads and monuments, renamed provinces, and filled the air with fascist propaganda, but the people answered with hymn and fasting. When the Italians executed priests, others took their place. When they burned churches, new altars rose in the mountains. The ark remained hidden, but its presence was everywhere, meaning the people were acting godly against those soldiers. Haile Selassie's time in exile deepened his understanding of kingship. In London, he met world leaders who treated him as a curiosity, a relic of the vanished world. Yet he knew he was carrying something none of them possessed, a covenant line unbroken since King Solomon. He told a British journalist in 1938, "Empires rise from ambition and fall to vanity. Ours was built on obedience." In the silence of exile, the emperors began to see the war as something far larger than geopolitics. Mussolini's invasion was not simply the fall of a nation. It was a war between the throne of heaven and the thrones of men. And like David fleeing from Saul, Haile Selassie understood that sometimes God removes his anointed from the palace so that the palace may be judged. While Rome celebrated its false victory, Ethiopia's true king prayed. The League of Nations expelled him. The world ignored him. But in the unseen realm, his prayers moved heaven. He became the embodiment of Psalm 132. "Lord, remember David and all his afflictions, how he swore unto the Lord, surely I will not give sleep to mine eyes until I find a place for the Lord, in habitation for the mighty God of Jacob." That habitation, that ark, that covenant still rested in Ethiopia. And though its king was in exile, its guardian was not. The ark had once departed Jerusalem to preserve the presence of God on earth. Now it would preserve Ethiopia until the day its emperor returned. And in that divine symmetry lies the mystery of power. While Mussolini ruled with fear, Haile Selassie ruled from faith. Rome had its armies, Ethiopia had its ark. One would crumble into ruin, the other would rise again, crowned not by conquest but by endurance. And in the unseen realm, Ethiopia's struggle was never merely against an empire of men. It was against the very powers that sought to erase God's presence from the earth. As the world watched Mussolini's troops march across Africa, few understood that the true war was being fought in prayer, in fasting, and in the silence of holy men who refused to bow to Rome's idols. The Italians believed that they conquered Ethiopia by force, but in heaven's record, the war had only just begun. From his exile in Britain, Emperor Haile Selassie fasted 40 days. He prayed for divine intervention, not for vengeance, but for vindication, that the world might see that no weapon formed against God's covenant could stand. Monks in Axum joined him in spirit, reciting Psalms 35 on a daily basis. "Plead my cause, O Lord, with them that strive with me, fight against them that fight against me." The monasteries became fortresses of prayer. Entire communities took vows of silence, refusing to speak a single word until Ethiopia was free again. In those years, strange things began to happen all across the empire. Italian garrison stations near Axum reported hearing chants carried on in the wind at night and ancient hymns in a language that no soldier could understand. Pilots flying over Lake Tana spoke of seeing columns of light rising from the water. When they attempted to bomb certain monasteries, their instruments failed and their planes turned back midair as though guided by unseen hands. The Vatican dismissed these stories as superstition, but the troops who survived whispered among themselves that Ethiopia was protected by the spirit of the ark. Bernard Leeman, in his notes, preserved at the Queen of Sheba University, described the phenomenon as a national intercession, a moment when the prayers of an entire people fused into one spiritual force. In his words, the ark did not sit idle. She moved in spirit through the land, strengthening the weak and co-founding the invaders. confounding the invaders. Whether legend or miracle, it was this invisible resistance that broke the will of Mussolini's soldiers long before their armies were defeated in a battlefield. Something that America needs to learn about today and do the same thing, don't you think? Now, as the war dragged on, the Italians found themselves cursed by the very land that they claimed to own. Crops failed, their supply lines faltered, and their morale collapsed. Soldiers spoke of sleepless nights filled with visions, faces of monks, women dressed in white robes, and a glowing chest borne upon shoulders of light. To the Ethiopian resistance, these were signs that heaven fought beside them. Haile Selassie, though far away from home, never ceased to speak of the Ark's unseen hand. In one of his wartime messages to his people, broadcast secretly on shortwave radio, he declared, "Ethiopia is wounded but not forsaken. The covenant remains with you. The tablet of Zion walks among the mountains and valleys. The Lord has hidden his presence from the proud, but reveals it to the humble. Stand, for God is with us." It's a beautiful story, isn't it? Across the highlands, this message ignited faith. The resistance known as the Abragnak, the patriots began to rally again. They saw themselves not as rebels, but as guardians of the covenant, defenders of God's throne on earth. Before battle, they fasted and prayed. They carried crosses carved from olive wood and tablets wrapped in white cloth. When they advanced against the Italians, they sang Psalm 68, "Let God arise, let his enemies be scattered." Even the weather seemed to conspire on their behalf. Torrential rains turned the Italian roads into rivers of mud, swallowing tanks and supply trucks. Locusts devoured their crops, and diseases spread among the troops. Every attempt to desecrate a church ended in disaster. The Ethiopians, it was not a coincidence, it was covenant justice. They believed the ark itself had called down judgment upon those who dared to touch God's dwelling. This is something that should be in the Bible. This happened last century, folks. This is Bible stuff here. The Vatican's emissaries began to grow uneasy. Reports reached Rome of chapels glowing at night, of Italian officers struck blind after entering holy precincts, of fires that extinguished themselves the moment they touched church walls. When one general demanded to see the Ark of Axum, his convoy was destroyed in an unexplained explosion the following day. These events were quietly removed from fascist dispatches, but they were never forgotten by those who saw them. I was able to dig up some books, some old books from people who were eyewitnesses and talked about this. By 1940, Mussolini's empire, once hailed as eternal, was collapsing under its own weight. The British had entered the horns of Africa, and Haile Selassie returned with them, leading an army of Ethiopians who had never stopped fighting. See, the British thought, well, maybe we can get it. Yet even as his troops advanced, the emperor insisted on prayer before every engagement. He told his generals, "We're not reclaiming land, but sanctifying it." That's a man of God. When Addis Ababa was finally liberated in 1941, the people did not celebrate with banners or speeches. They gathered instead in the churches. In Axum, the bells of Mary of Zion rang for the first time in 5 years. The guardian monk emerged from his cell holding the sacred keys of the sanctuary. He did not speak, but his eyes shone with tears. The ark, he said, had never moved from its hiding place. She remained, he whispered, for the angels themselves stood guard. For all of you talking about the female and the male and divine spirit and all of that, well, here's your answer. They call the ark a she. They look at the ark as the birthing place of God. It's beautiful. Now, Mussolini's war had ended in ruin. His empire in ashes. His pride was broken, his false Zion exposed for what it was. Yet Ethiopia lived untouched at its core, protected not by armies or politics, but by the living presence of the Almighty. The ark had proven once again that heaven defends what belongs to it. The world called it liberation. The Ethiopians called it resurrection. The covenant had outlasted another empire, but just as it always had, and the war that began as conquest had ended as a revelation. For a while, Mussolini fought with bombs and bullets. The priests of Ethiopia had fought with spirit and truth, and heaven had answered them. When the smoke of the war finally lifted in 1941, it revealed two worlds, one exhausted by conquest and another born through faith. Rome's fascist dream had collapsed in humiliation, its legions scattered, its leader hiding from the judgment of his own people. But in Ethiopia, the Lion of Judah roared again. Haile Selassie, after 5 years in exile, returned not as a king reclaiming a throne, but as a witness to the covenant's endurance. He didn't even want it. His return was not accompanied by fanfare or parades either. It was solemn, prophetic, almost biblical, humble. As his convoy crossed the borders of his home, priests walked ahead barefoot, carrying tablets wrapped in silk. They sang ancient psalm that echoed across the valleys. Let God arise and let his enemies be scattered. Let those who hate him flee before him. The people knelt as the emperor passed, not to worship a man, but to honor the covenant that he represented. This happened last 100 years ago. Guys, this is a story that belongs in the Bible. On May 5th, 1941, the same date Mussolini had once declared the Day of Empire, Haile Selassie entered Addis Ababa, the city that had been trampled by foreign boots, now rang with hymns. In his address to the nation, he stood upon the steps of the palace and said, "Our victory is not by our own strength, but by the hand of God. He has shown that the covenant is alive and that no power on earth can break it." His words carried the gravity of prophecy, for what had been restored was not merely a kingdom, but a testimony. While Italy's soldiers lay defeated, the Ark of the Covenant remained untouchable, its guardians unbroken. Monks emerged from their mountain sanctuaries carrying crosses blackened by years of smoke and war. The bells of Axum tolled once more, and for the first time in half a decade, the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion opened its doors. The guardian monk, who had neither left the chapel nor spoken to any living soul since the invasion, came forward to meet his emperor. Witnesses record that Haile Selassie fell to his knees before the humble keeper, kissed the ground, and wept. The monk whispered only 4 words, "The ark is safe." Come on. Come on. In that moment, the visible and the invisible met. Mussolini's empire of steel had fallen before a covenant written on stone. The so-called New Rome had vanished. But the ancient Zion still stood. The ark had endured exile, desecration, and the laughter of unbelievers, and remained exactly where it had been, always been, guarded not by armies, but by obedience. No wonder why God sent it there. Now that is a people I can fall in love with. Graham Hancock, decades later, would interview the descendants of these guardians. Their testimonies never changed. During the occupation, the ark was hidden in plain sight. Soldiers came, searched, threatened, but never found it. Hidden in plain sight. They never moved it, folks. It was right there, and they couldn't find it. Let me read that one more time. During the occupation, the ark was hidden in plain sight. Soldiers came, searched, threatened, but never found it. One priest told Hancock the ark will never be taken by those who walk in pride. God blinds their eyes as he blinded Pharaoh. In those words lies the essence of Ethiopia's witness, that divine things cannot be handled by unholy hands. You see, they had the faith to keep the ark right where it was. And only rumors told the Mussolini and his army that it went to the islands, but it didn't. When Haile Selassie re-entered Axum, he refused to approach the sanctuary unbidden. He stood outside the ancient walls, bowed his head, and said, "The presence of God is here. Let the guardian remain my priest, for I am his servant." And to the crowds gathered around him, he spoke softly, "Empires pass away, but Zion endures." When they talk about Zion, they're talking about the real one, the real Father, Son, and Holy Spirit Zion, not the Zion of the Zionists, the fake Jews of Europe. So this was no political rhetoric. It was a spiritual revelation for Ethiopia and a story that should be in the Bible. For in that hour, Ethiopia became living proof that God had not abandoned the world. The Ark's survival was not an accident of history. It was a sign that heaven still intervenes when men try to enthrone themselves as God. And Mussolini's downfall was not just military, it was theological. He had attempted to seize the throne of the Almighty and was destroyed by the very power he sought to control. In the years that followed, Haile Selassie rebuilt Ethiopia with a reverence that bordered on liturgical, and he decreed national days of prayer and fasting by restoring the monasteries that had been burned and built new sanctuaries to honor the martyrs who had died defending the faith. When asked what sustained him through exile and war, he replied, "The covenant." The covenant means in agreement with God. Ethiopia's victory was not measured in territory or treaties, but in testimony. The ark has stood as a witness against the arrogance of man, proving that holiness cannot be conquered by force. The same ark that left Jerusalem when Solomon's heart grew proud now refused to be touched by another empire intoxicated with its own divinity. As the empire's procession departed Axum, the people sang, "Blessed be the Lord of Israel, who hath not given his heritage upon reproach." In that song was the essence of Ethiopia's deliverance, the eternal truth that God's promises are written in the language of empires, or not written in the language of empires, but in the faith of those who keep them. And thus ended the war for Zion. Mussolini lost. They don't have any paperwork that they can stay there. Neither does Britain. The ark remained unseen, but its victory was visible to all, and Rome's counterfeit empire was gone, and the covenant of Ethiopia endured, and it was luminous and unshaken. The mountain of God had once more defiled the armies of men, and those who sought to steal heaven had only proved that heaven still rules. If this doesn't wake up your faith in Jesus and God, I don't know what will. This is the most beautiful story. When the dust of war settled and Mussolini's body hung upside down in the Milan Square, the world closed another chapter in its long, tragic attempt to dethrone the divine. Yet the deeper lesson of Ethiopia's deliverance remained unseen by most. The battle never truly was about territory or oil or politics. It was about the Ark of the Covenant, about who has the right to wield the symbols of heaven, and what happens when men attempt to make themselves gods. Well, Mussolini's empire fell like every other that dared to touch the holy. But the pattern did not die with him. It was only paused, waiting for the next pretender to rise. In prophecy, Ethiopia's story stands as both warning and witness. The Ark of the Covenant is more than an artifact of history. It is a living testimony to God's unchanging rule. And what happened in Ethiopia is the same thing that happened in the Bible that we have read about. And it happened, and it's been recorded. So don't fall on your faith. God showed himself real in Ethiopia. Haile Selassie understood this mystery. And in his later years, he often spoke of the ark not as an object, but as a voice. He said, "It speaks." He says it speaks to those who listen in silence. It speaks of God's faithfulness and the folly of kings. His words were not poetic metaphor, folks. They were testimony. And the ark had survived not because of Ethiopia's strength, but because of heaven's jealousy. It belonged to none but the one who first caused it to be built. As the 20th century unfolded, new empires arose, nations boasting of technology, weaponry, and progress, promising peace through power, just as Mussolini did. We're doing it now with the technocrats. Yet each bears the same shadow, the same temptation to build a new Zion without God, to recreate the kingdom of heaven on earth through control, not through holiness. And so history circles back towards its final test. The false Zion of Rome was only the rehearsal for the kingdom of the Antichrist, a regime that will, once again, claim divine authority, perform false miracles, and demand the worship of the world. It will seek, as Mussolini sought, to possess the covenant, to control the temple, to claim the throne of God. But the Ark stands as the eternal boundary that they cannot cross. And Ethiopia's triumph over fascism was not merely political, it was prophetic. It revealed the spiritual law written all across creation. That power seized by pride must self-destruct, and faith preserved through humility will outlast it. The monks who guarded the ark had no weapons, no armies, no allies. Yet the empires that surrounded them fell one by one. And their victory came not by sword, but through reverence. They proved that holiness is the one force no tyranny can master. It should give you a lesson as to how to treat, if we go into martial law, how to treat the soldiers. Treat them in humility. Pray and fast. They are not in charge of your covenant. They will not be able to see it. And in this way, Ethiopia became a mirror of the church itself, a small and humble vessel carrying an infinite glory through the hostile world. And every nation that mocks God's covenant will face the same reckoning as Mussolini. Every ruler who believes he can sit in the seat of the Almighty will meet the same end. And yet every soul who bows, as Haile Selassie bowed before the ark, will share in the same deliverance. The ark still waits, hidden in silence, veiled behind ancient walls. What's up, Jude and Mary? I used to be on TikTok. They continue to shut me down. I'm back up, but I don't have many followers. But to those who walk by faith, its presence is unmistakable. It is pulse beneath history, the heartbeat of divine sovereignty that no empire can silence. And one day, Scripture says, the ark will appear again, seen in the temple of heaven at the sounding of the seventh trumpet. And when that moment comes, it will not rise from the earth to vindicate men, but to vindicate God. And until then, Ethiopia's story remains a parable for all end of days. Mussolini's Rome was not the first to fall, nor was it the last. And the final empire, the digital, global, post-Christian one now forming before our very eyes, will march the same path, armed with technology instead of tanks, propaganda instead of parades, memes, but driven by the same rebellion. And it too will try to steal what only heaven can bestow. And it too will fail. For the ark that Mussolini could not touch still stands as witness. Its silence is not absence. It's a warning. And its invisibility is not weakness. It is mercy. It awaits, patient as eternity, for the day when all thrones will bow before the only king who ever deserved them. That's Jesus. And when that day comes, the world will remember Ethiopia not as a relic of the past, but as the nation that kept faith when empires lost their souls. I'm pretty sure by now I have proven to you that God did move the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia because the way that they handled the Ark was scriptural. The Ark that Mussolini could not touch remains untouched still. And in that untouchable presence, the kingdom of heaven continues to reign unseen, undefeated, and unending. Now, the story of Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia is no longer just a page in the history book. It's a mirror held up to every generation that seeks to crown itself with the authority of heaven. Ain't gonna get it. And Mussolini believed he could seize what belonged to God, that by taking Ethiopia, he could claim the covenant himself. But what he found was not conquest, it was silence. A silence that no empire could penetrate. A silence that carried the whisper of eternity. As the Ark of the Covenant remains more than a relic, it is the visible shadow of an invisible truth that God alone rules over the kingdoms of men. And it has outlasted every empire that has tried to touch it. Babylon carried it off, Judah's treasures, and perished in a night. Rome crucified the Son of God and fell beneath its own decadence. Mussolini marched to Zion and ended dangling from a rope. And yet the Ark still rests in Ethiopia where angels, not armies, keep watch. That's a miracle. Ethiopia's victory was not one of might, but of holiness. Its priests and monks did not fight with swords, but with prayer. And their power was in obedience, and their fortress in faith. And they proved that a covenant sealed by God cannot be annulled by men. In Axum, beneath the ancient stones of the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, the ark still sits as a silent rebuke to all those who seek to rule without righteousness. It is heaven's veto against tyranny, the reminder that holiness is greater than empire. And Haile Selassie understood this better than any statesman of his age. When he returned from exile, he did not gloat nor seek vengeance. He knelt in the dust outside the sanctuary and thanked God for sparing his nation. He knew the war had been more than military, it had been cosmic. It was a battle between pride and humility, between Caesar and Christ, between the counterfeit throne and the true one. And though Mussolini claimed to be the restorer of Rome, it was Haile Selassie who walked in the footsteps of King David. And in the end, what Mussolini could not understand was that divine power is never seized. It is received. You cannot march upon heaven. You cannot legislate holiness. You cannot bomb your way into God's presence. The ark cannot be captured because it is not a weapon. It is a witness. It bears testimony that the Almighty still reigns and that his presence dwells with the humble, not the proud. And Ethiopia's survival was prophecy fulfilled. Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God. She did, and God answered. And the same hand that shielded the ark in Axum will shield his people in the days to come. And when the final empire rises, when technology replaces temples and the Antichrist builds his own false Zion, the story will repeat itself. The proud will reach for the holy, and heaven will answer with silence, with thunder, and with fire. And the ark that Mussolini could not touch stands as a symbol of that promise. Empires crumble, leaders fall, ideologies rot into dust. But the presence of God remains. The covenant is eternal. The throne is unshaken. The ark still waits, not for kings, not for conquerors, but for the return of the true king, whose law was written once upon its stone tablets and now is written upon the hearts of his people. And when he comes in silence, when he comes, the silence will end. The veil will lift. The ark will no longer be hidden, and the nations will see what Mussolini could not. That power without holiness is ruin, and that God alone reigns from everlasting to everlasting.
Why do 75% of people feel exhausted all the time? The answer might surprise you. In the 1920s, Standard Oil decided to dive into medicine. They pushed synthetic petroleum into our drugs. Sure, it masked symptoms, but it wrecked our guts. Our good bacteria, which fight off parasites and heavy metals, got wiped out by crude oil. But here's the good news. We can fix this by going back to nature. Introducing Elite Potion, the world's top detox program. It restores your good bacteria by removing toxic threats like aluminum, strontium, barium, and parasites. Imagine feeling energized and alive again. They said there couldn't be a pill that did it all. We invented it. Visit elitepotion.com and reclaim your health from synthetic pharmaceuticals. Your body will thank you.
This has been Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Garner. Tune in tomorrow night when God gives me another revelation to tell you guys all about. God bless you, God keep you, and God thank you for supporting my show. Go to jamescarter.com and sign up to my newsletter just in case I get shut down. There are 3 books there that I wrote. You can download them. They're free. Also, go to elitepotion.com and sign up to my award-winning detox program of heavy metals and parasites. You'll feel better. It's what's killing the temple. Pray about it. And if you could all do me one big favor, if you could all just try to love your neighbor, well, I do believe this world would be a better place. See you tomorrow.